You're listening to the Sunny Days Podcast. I'm your host, Alex the Good Witch, a professional psychic, healer, and coach specializing in subconscious reprogramming, inner child work, and intuition development to help you create your happiest, most fulfilling life. Thank you for tuning in on this sunny day. Hello, welcome to the Sunny Days Podcast. My name is Alex Travis. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about triggers in dating, love, and relationships. We're going to be learning all about how triggers usually come up and affect us in our relationships or in our dating before we maybe even get into relationships, and how those show up in all these different ways, shapes, and forms, and how to start really being more aware of them and more understanding of not only our own triggers, but other people's triggers, and how we can start working with them rather than have them come up and get in the way of things. Because at the end of the day, even if we're sweeping things under the rug or if someone else is sweeping things under the rug, we truly can't avoid these triggers. So we want to be able to really work with them. And that's what we'll start to dive into today in this episode. So specifically for today's episode, we'll actually be tuning into a lesson in my Love and Happiness program. So this lesson is called It Is That Deep. It's all about triggers, and it is within the section of working through triggers of ourselves and others. So this is just one very small piece of this very huge program that we will be diving into. After creating this video lesson for the program, I just felt so called to be able to share it with more people. I'm super excited to share it here with you today on the podcast. And yeah, basically it'll be a different format than you'd expect from the podcast because it's taken from the program itself, from that video lesson. So without further ado, let's get into it. So today's lesson is called Triggers. It is that deep. So if you ever heard the phrase, it's not that deep, it is that deep. And we're going to be diving right in. So triggers in relationships. So the main reason that people tend to break up is triggers. And this can happen in so many different ways, shapes, or forms. It doesn't have to be, this picture of this big, argument that blows up and people are really triggered, or they keep getting triggered over and over again in this very tangible way. It can also be in a way where triggers are very much cause us to sweep things under the rug and build into a lot of resentment. So in some way, shape, or form, the main reason why people break up is typically due to triggers on both or either side. So another common, and then after I go over this line, I'm going to fix this because I'm obviously realizing that everything is appearing at once, and that's too much. My slides are already too much anyway, but so let me just finish this thought and I'll fix that. So another common reason that people break up is typically more on the intuitive side. So this would be things like, we weren't meant to, continue on together anymore. I just felt like it had run its course. We both are kind of going different ways. I just feel like, there's this new chapter, and that's a very different kind of energy. So those breakups can still validly have, sadness and grief and difficulty reconciling, this decision and, what's going on with that. And that's all valid. It makes sense. But it's on a very different level than the breakups that come from triggers. So those breakups usually lead to exacerbated emotions. So like I said, there are emotions that make sense to feel when you're a human being. And then there's having those emotions be really big and be really difficult to overcome and really confusing or really hurtful and painful, or really not wanting it, or being so angry at the other person. And now you have this whole other dynamic where maybe you hate them now, and just all those kinds of bigger energy that has to do with the breakup. That's usually means that triggers were actually at the root cause of what's going on with this relationship, what ended up happening to it, and what ended up leading to the breakup. Because when it's more intuitive, it's just a lot gentler. It just makes a lot more sense. And it's just coming from a very, very different place. Okay, so triggers on both sides, because usually it ends up getting to a point where the triggers are on both sides. So triggers on both sides are usually what block us from being able to be our best selves, being able to remain empathetic and understanding towards each other. That starts to get lost and diminished over time. It also keeps us from problem solving, which is really important in a relationship, to be able to come together and problem solve, like as a team, what's best for us both, and like what are, actual constructive solutions, right? It keeps us from evolving and growing together, as well as individually, and from enjoying each other, right? When all these other things are blocked off, it's really hard to just enjoy that person and being in a relationship with that person. So you start to lose, um, even what tends to possibly be the glue for a while, which is like, the good times and the connection you have that can easily start to get lost if you continue down this road of triggers affecting the relationship, and being able to accept each other, like have that flexibility and acceptance of each person being individuals with their own flaws and their own mistakes and their own emotions and things like that. That starts to that gets blocked off in the moment of triggers and will start to deteriorate over time as well. So basically, things that get blocked in moments of being triggered will tend to start becoming just the overall attitude and norm, and context of the relationship over time, even if you're not in moments of triggers, moment to moment, it kind of just becomes the vibe, for lack of a better word, in the relationship. So basically, everything you need to not only one, stay together, but two, enjoy your life in staying together gets, thrown to the wayside, gets lost in translation when triggers infiltrate the relationship. So I say stay together and enjoy your life together because people that experience this in their relationship, and again, whatever those details are going to look very different for everyone, but the general sense that triggers have infiltrated the relationship in some way. It's not just about staying together because there are plenty of people who that happens and they stay together and maybe they stay together for indefinitely or forever. Um, and that's one thing, but that's not necessarily the goal or even what might be best, if there's not the enjoyment in staying together. That might look like a relationship that's very unfulfilling, that's a lot of settling, that is just not the way that ideally you would want to spend your life, but that people might just get really used to, but really ends up weighing on them. Even if they act like they can settle into it, it'll usually show up in a lot of other issues and discomforts and just like this dissatisfaction and even things like that constant stress and that constant settlement leading to, issues physically, like having, that stress physically show up in different ways, like in your body and in your health, right? So it's not just about staying together, it's about being in fulfillment together overall, for the most part. And then triggers is also what leads to resentment. So having these triggers infiltrate the relationship is what ends up leading to resentment as well. So that's like what I was talking about too, where it's like people could stay together, yes, but in those situations, there's probably a lot of underlying resentment there. And that underlying resentment may end up looking different ways to different people. That may end up looking like they're just really disconnected, like they just, really live two different lives and are no longer connected to each other in their relationship. That this can look like a lot of bickering, and like constantly having little comments that put each other down and things like that. It can show up in a bunch of different ways, but triggers is what leads to resentment. And this can range in how this appears. So I want you to understand with triggers in general, whether this is just like in the moment someone is triggered, and also just like the long term effects of like that infiltrating the relationship, it appears in all of these ranges. So I want you to throw away the notion that when I talk about triggers, that means that someone is like visibly upset. That 100% can be the case. But what I'm saying is that it doesn't have to be in that way. Because if we only see it in that way, we're not allowing ourselves to actually understand the full picture and what might be really going on within us or within someone else. So it's important to understand that triggers can come up in a way where it's more like things are under the rug, things are avoided. We don't talk about that. Let's just remain on the surface. Let's not dig into that. Um, let's just be more withdrawn from each other, can be a symptom of it, avoidance. Um, and yeah, so that is a way that triggers show up that I feel like often gets overlooked, and that becomes a detriment to overlook triggers, right? Because you may not realize that you're like, oh, like, you know, they're not being triggered, like, that's not infiltrating the relationship, but if they're being really withdrawn about things, and, like, avoiding things, or just constantly, like, hoping that, like, "Oh, things will go back to normal," or "Things are fine," that can be coming from a triggered place, even though it's not, like, an in-your-face trigger, like, I'm yelling, I'm throwing something, I'm crying, I'm, like, visibly upset, a common roller coaster of, when things are good, they're good, but when they're bad. And that is all triggers as well. But I just definitely want you to keep sight in how this can show up in other ways that seem to people to be more subtle. And I feel like easier to kind of be like, oh, no, like, I'm not triggered by that. We definitely want to open up, the honesty window within ourselves. And we're at a place where we can do that more now than maybe we were able to in the past from the work we've been doing in love and happiness. Things like parts work and everything like that has been really building like a relationship within yourself that's coming from um, a place where you can accept yourself more and love yourself more and be nurturing and everything like that, so that there's room to be honest and see those things. Okay, so an intro to triggers to just clarify things, set the scene more as we dive into it for this lesson, but also just the section in general is focused on triggers. So, regardless of where you're at in your love life now, it's important to get to a place where you can work on triggers of yourself and of others, like what this section is called, working through triggers of yourself and others. So this may seem at first glance like, okay, this is probably applying more to someone who is in a relationship and in like a deeper, serious relationship to be able to be working through this. Um, and the reason that a lot of what I'm bringing up is kind of focused through that lens is because that's typically where bigger triggers will come up and be more known and can start to end up causing problems. There tends to be a certain point in being in a relationship with someone where these start to rise up. And a lot of times that is when people either break up or either work through it and become stronger and set the precedent of how they're able to handle shit that's hard in the future and they can stay together through that. Or they don't break up, but they also don't do the working through part. And then it can easily become a slippery slope of this is a relationship we settle into. Maybe we end up getting married because we've just been together a long time and it makes sense. And we end up having kids together because we've been married and it just makes sense. But overall, it's been like settling for a very long time and there hasn't been a lot of satisfaction. And this may be just ongoing and living in that and not feeling very great about it and not feeling your best about it. Or ending up getting to a place where someone wakes up one day and is like, what am I doing? How have I been doing this for so long? I don't want to do this anymore. So because of that, that is the lens that we are talking about. But if you are someone who is not in a serious relationship, or you're getting to know someone, or you're just dating and like open to meeting someone in general and completely single, this is super important for you to learn because this will end up coming up. Like, this is a part of the journey of getting close to someone and being with them. And for every relationship that's different, at what point that comes up, right? This could come into someone's relationship a year into the relationship, 3 years into the relationship. It really just depends. But at some point, it's going to come up. And it's important for you to know this. If you are single, then that's awesome to be knowing this beforehand, because a lot of people get caught off guard, and they'll say, yeah, things were really good, for the first year. But then, they started like acting differently, and like things weren't the same. And I didn't like how they handled things, and like how they were talking to me, or what they would do when they're stressed, and I just started to see all of their problems, right? So you might have went from being in like bliss and excitement, and we have this connection and wonderful things, and maybe things pop up here and there that are kind of like issues and stuff like that. But eventually it'll get to this point where someone's stuff, quote unquote, or their baggage, if you will start to come up. So it's important to know that that does happen, and here is how to work through that. And if you're someone who's already in a relationship and you're like, that ship has sailed, we have passed through that point, then this is applied to what you are going through with your person and what comes up now in real time, with your relationship. So we want to get to the place where not only can you work on triggers of yourself and of others, but you can even be in a place where you do so in the moment. And that is awesome. You can do it literally in the moment. It doesn't have to be kind of after the fact, figuring things out, working through it. And then it's like, okay, let's apply this to, next time and sort this out. That's awesome. And that's usually where you'll probably start. But you will get to a place where you're able to do it in the moment. So in this section, we're going to be learning all about triggers, and I'm talking about this whole section, all about triggers and being able to work through them. So this means that we're working through them, whether they're coming from ourselves or the other person, or an entanglement of both. Because oftentimes someone else being triggered because of how they're acting from their trigger, again, this can be in ways that are more what you would expect, like someone is upset, like more visibly. But even them acting out of a trigger in a way that is more like subtle and withdrawn, this can end up entangling now our triggers. And then now, instead of it's just like they're triggered or I'm triggered, now it's like we both are, and it's like enmesh in the situation. So we're going to be learning all about that and being able to work through it in this section. So this is going to include a mix of self-work and self-awareness, and also outer work and outer awareness, which is huge. So super exciting that we're at the point where, we've been now being able to incorporate a bit more of both as we continue on. And then this is going to set the foundation for implementing effective communication and repair. So there isn't really effective communication and repair without having this foundation of being able to work through the triggers of yourself and work through the triggers of someone else. It doesn't mean that you have to be perfect in it by any means, but the ability and understanding of how to do that, and how to start implementing that is absolutely imperative to be able to have effective communication and repair, which is why so many people struggle with communication, and in a way that can even lead to like breakups and divorces, is because a lot of times it's taught like communication is key. Communication is key. Make sure you communicate. And this can even be done in like a couples therapy session, or sessions where you're taught to communicate, and maybe you're giving tools to communicate, but without the foundational work of the triggers and where those are coming from and how to work through them for yourself, and also work through them when your partner is experiencing that. Without that, the communication isn't actually key, isn't actually getting you anywhere. And you may end up feeling like, well, we tried and it's not working. We tried and we tried and we tried and we hoped, and it's not fixing the things. It's not really resolving things. Like we feel similarly to how we felt before, and this means that this isn't going to work, and we're going to go our separate ways. So you may have even experienced this for yourself in the past, but that does happen a lot, and it's because there isn't this ability and full understanding of the triggers in the context of now let's communicate. So today so for today's lesson specifically, not this section, we're going to completely shatter a very common issue when it comes to triggers. So I'm very excited about today. We're going to blow wide open the way that we probably all typically see triggers for other people and triggers for ourselves. And that's going to allow us to be able to actually like work through the triggers of ourselves and the other person in the moment. Being able to first just kind of shatter how we're seeing things without realizing that this is how we're seeing things. So the common issue when it comes to triggers is that we tend to allow ourselves to believe that the triggers of either ourselves or the other person are coming from a true place that has to do with the moment at hand. So what I mean by that is that, let's say the other person is triggered, the things that they're doing and saying and feeling, we take this as truth. And they take it as truth. They're like, this is how I feel about this. Like, I'm upset about this, or I like really, really, really don't want to talk about it. And we take this all as truth, both for someone else and like from our own perspective. And that is the biggest problem. And that is how we fall into this and then just start to go down the slope of how this starts to slowly affect our relationship as a whole. And I'll explain more of that, but that's just kind of the fundamentals of what we're talking about here. So triggers are convincing. So when ourself or someone else is triggered, what happens is our brains attach all of our thoughts, feelings, our responses to this moment and to this person as if they're the cause of our triggers. So what happens is we're triggered by something, right? And now, from here on out, in this moment, now that the trigger has happened, that's outside of our control, that now from here on out, all of our thoughts and feelings and how we're responding to the situation is all about the situation and is all about that person. So very much like, you made me feel this way, like you upset me, you hurt me, you you did this, and like I hate when you do that. And it just becomes very much like this specific situation, this specific person is the cause of our triggers. And you might be like, well, yeah, that's why I'm triggered. But the thing is this moment that you're experiencing, this person that you're probably experiencing this from, is just a projected reflection of our triggers. It's like an illusion of our triggers. And it's not just a reflection of our triggers, but again, it's a projected reflection of our triggers. So what is our triggers really? But first, yes, there is validity in this moment and in this person, and that, you're feeling the way that you're feeling and having thoughts come up that you're having come up. There is validity in it, right? And this validity can range to objectively, there is an issue here, objectively, maybe that person shouldn't have done that, or that was harmful for them to do it, it was hurtful, to it being very, very minimal to even nothing at all. And that happens to everyone, where we fully see it that way, that they did this thing and it triggered us. And sometimes in that scale of validity, it could be nothing at all. It could be 100% projected, or it can just be somewhat projected, and there's totally validity there. So I'm definitely not trying to invalidate that people
cause harm, and people, can do things that make you feel really hurt or disrespected or unheard or whatever feelings are coming up with the trigger. It's not to invalidate any of that, but we do need to look at things a different way. So the problem with seeing this moment and or this person as the cause of the triggers is that we will never get anywhere. We will never get anywhere with that. So yes, there can be validity there, but if you're just holding on to that validity and being like this is how I feel, and like you shouldn't do this, that's bad of you to do this, that's hurtful, that's wrong, I don't like that, or like I'm justified in like my anger, I'm justified that I don't want to talk about this and it's uncomfortable, I'm justified. The more that we stick with that validity, the more we're not going to get anywhere. We need to break the assumption that this moment slash this person is what we're dealing with here. This is not what we're dealing with here. So yes, there is and can be validity, but we need to understand that we like hold on to that and like take that as the whole picture. And we need to loosen our grip on that because we're not going to get anywhere with that. And it's very contradictory because to the scared part of your brain, the literally the triggered part of your brain and your nervous system, it's like we need to hold on to that. Like we are so justified, and it's like it holds on to all of those thoughts and feelings and everything so tightly. But what we actually need to do to get what we want out of this is to loosen our grip on that. And again, that's not to invalidate things. So we're not loosening our grip to let anyone off the hook, so to speak. That's not like the motivation behind this. It's like, you should, be more understanding, or you should forgive, or anything like that. That can be true, but that's not like the motivation behind this. It's not like shaming you into that. It's to loosen your grip for yourself and like for what you really want here and the bigger picture, and being able to have the actual outcome that you're wanting, which is to, feel loved and respected and heard by this person, to, be more connected afterwards, to have things go well moving forward in the relationship from here, right? You want all those things, and loosening your grip is going to give you those things. So only after dealing with the real cause of the trigger, which we will talk about, but only after dealing with the real cause of the trigger can we actually work with the situation slash person at hand, right? Like what we typically see as the cause of our trigger, usually all that we want to do is like respond to that. This is why we're triggered. We're responding to that, whatever way responding is. It could be ignoring, it could be fighting, it could be anything, but it's all about that thing that happened or that person did. That's the problem here. This is the cause. It's all about looking at that and those details. But what we're doing is we are, again, never going to get anywhere doing that. So what needs to happen is we need to deal with the real cause of the trigger, which is not the details of this thing. It's not actually what's going on in this moment. And then after we do that, we can actually work with this thing at hand, right? Because like I said, there can be validity there. So every once in a while, after working through the trigger, you'll realize, wow, I would have literally never guessed, but this was like 100% a projection, and there's really nothing to be done here, and and oops daisies, and that's fine. But a lot of the times there's going to be some validity. So where that validity lies, yes, you can work on those things, and like yes, you should, right? So I'm not saying that again we're like letting this situation off the hook, so to speak. There's work to be done there, and that's cool. Do the work. I'm saying do that, but not until after dealing with the real cause of the trigger. And being able to work with the person at hand will usually come a bit more with the next section of communication and repair of like what that actually looks like and addressing those things. But it's important to understand that we usually just jump to that, and we jump to trying to figure that out or to fix it or to deal with it in some way that we think is going to make us feel better or make things right. And none of that will get us anywhere at all. We actually need to look in a completely different place than the thing that we think just triggered us. But that doesn't mean that we're shelving it forever. So we need to keep this in mind, not only for ourselves, but also how we see the other person's perspective. So what this means is we're keeping this in mind as far as like, hey, this thing that's going on right now and this person and what they're doing right now isn't actually the real cause of our trigger. And we'll talk about what really is the real cause, but knowing that this isn't actually the real cause of this trigger. So it's important not only to understand that for yourself and your own, like, di- dis, disassociating the two. I apologize, that's not the right word. But it's also important to keep in mind that when someone else is triggered, that that's what's happening to how they see you and how they feel about you. They think that you're the cause of that trigger, right? And they're acting from that place. So it's really important for yourself too to understand that that is where their mind is coming from. That is where their actions and their feelings are coming from, where they're seeing you as the cause, right? And we'll talk about being able to work through that because obviously you don't deserve to be thought of as the cause when it's usually something that is beyond that, and there's just whatever percentage of projection going on there that would connect you to the cause. But it's important to understand that just for your own self and like your own grace and self-love and like how you see yourself too, because you need to detach how they're how they're perceiving you. Like you need to understand that they're perceiving you as the cause, and that's the place they're acting from. So when you know that, you can kind of give yourself permission to not take the things they're doing personally. And I don't mean that to excuse their actions, but I mean literally like for you and yourself to not internalize that as this is personal. They're mad at me. They hate me. They think I'm so mean, or they're acting like I'm such a bad person, or I did something so wrong. Like, we need to allow ourselves to not have them thinking of us as the cause to then become like internalized in how they see us. And like now we think that this person like sees us in this bad light, and so on and so forth. So it's important to understand that from the opposite perspective as well. So triggers don't just convince ourselves to be roped into their ruse. So what I mean by their ruse is seeing this situation, like this person currently as the cause, like that's the ruse. The ruse is like tricking you to like really believe that and like really stand firm in that. And like that's now where all of our feelings and actions and everything is coming from. And like that is the crusade that we're on, regardless of how that looks, as far as our actual like response goes. Um, but our triggers will convince us to be like roped into this ruse, but they'll also convince others as well. So that's another point where when you're looking at someone else and realizing that they're coming from a place where they're triggered about this, what's going to happen is that when they look at you as like the cause of their trigger, right? They're going to be speaking and acting from a place that will easily rope you into this ruse, will easily rope you into their narrative that you were the cause of this. So let's say they get triggered by something. So their brain is like, they're the cause of this. So now they are, upset at you and they're like, you shouldn't have done that or whatever they're doing or saying, right? You might now, if you were to internalize that and take it personally, now you feel like crap, or you feel mad and offended that they think of you like that because that's not who you are, and that's not the case, and that's not what your intentions were. So now let's say you get defensive back, right? And like you start getting defensive about your stance in the situation, right? Okay, now you're like roped in. Now you're roped into this different reality, this like triggered, veiled reality that's not like rooted in what's the truth and what's really going on, which we'll get to like more of the truth next. But um just understand that it's really easy to get roped into that line of thinking. And that we do the same too. Like when we're triggered and we're seeing someone else as the cause, our actions and everything they now will start to respond and feel a certain way about our triggered actions and about our triggered feelings. And by them doing that, like they're easily roped into our story. And then now we're in this like whole other world that's not constructive. It's not from a grounded place. We're not on the same team. It's a whole other world that we're in, and that's kinda what I was talking about too with, like, the enmeshment of triggers, that tends to happen, um, in a way that leads us to just, like, we are in this whole other world now. We are no longer here. We are both seeing our own shade of red, and just taken over by that. Okay, so triggers disconnect. So triggers not only bring us into our unhelpful automations, right? So we talked about this like and discovered some with our own programming and even through the lens of attachment, right? So triggers will bring us into these unhelpful automations because triggers are triggering that we are unsafe for whatever reason. And then it carries out whatever our programming is. So that's going to look different for everyone. So triggers do that. And triggers also disconnect us from our intuition. So, in doing so, in bringing us more with the automations, they're disconnecting us from our intuition. So, our guidance system is no longer coming from a wiser place that's in our best interests. And this also includes you can look at it as like intuitive and or you can also look at it as literally the prefrontal cortex. Like being in our triggers puts us into a whole different part of our brain that is not the part of our brain that is like problem solving, that can see the bigger picture, that can connect the dots of what's going on and like work with somebody else. It's the part of our brain that can, like, we're in a different part of our brain that is not connected to those abilities at all. So, intuition, prefrontal cortex, however we want to view it, but both are true that it's disconnecting us from these abilities that we need and that are guiding us to our best interest and what we really want. But they also disconnect us from the person we're interacting with because fear will see this other person as the enemy, as the problem, again, as the cause of the trigger. So it greatly disconnects us from that person. Like once we're triggered, we are now on this path of going deeper and deeper into this person is against us. And that is just a fear um like automation that might not be a conscious decision that you have and what you really believe, deep down when you're in a different state. But that is what happens like in your mind and in your body. And it's important to understand that now, like your thoughts and your actions, how you see them, how you're feeling about them, and how they feel about how you project they feel about you. And all of these things are now coming from a place where this person is against me. So it's important to understand that that is a core belief um, when you're in a trigger is like, this person is against me. And so there'll be a lot of assumptions based on that. So this is where you can find things being more and more in this, we're in like another world now. So for example, once you're in the trigger and your brain is like, core belief, this person's against me. Now, objectively, this person might say something and objectively, or they're with their intentions, let's say this is actually them trying to say something that is meant to be like helpful or understanding or like just a step in the right direction. But now, because we're coming from the core belief, this person is against me, we'll receive that and interpret that in a whole different way and interpret that in a way that is literally against us. So we will start like creating evidence of that belief that this person is against us. So now it doesn't even really matter what that person is like doing or saying because it's all going to be filtered through that lens that they're against you. So it's never really going to be right. It's never going to be like, oh, okay, you really care, like you're really on my team. Like it's going to be spun around. So I want to give the example of this even under the lens of anxious attachment. Just because it came up because we're talking about how triggers will disconnect us and make us feel like that's the enemy, that's the problem. So if you're someone who resonates with anxious attachment, this may be a little confusing because you may be like, well, when I'm really triggered, like even if I am, let's say really hurt, like I'm doing a lot of self-blame about this, or I am actually at the point where I'm like upset at this person, and actually putting like some blame on them, but I'm still coming from the place where like I actually like I want them. Like I'm triggered, but like I don't want them to leave. I don't want them to, break up with me. I don't I don't want them to take space or be away from them. Like I want you here. I want to talk about it, right? So it can seem a little conflicting because it can be like, oh, that's usually how I feel. So I don't necessarily see them as the enemy or the problem, like against, because I'm still trying to like, wait, don't go, I want you here. I want to work things out. So I want to speak to that for just a moment. So even under the lens of anxious attachment, if someone has done something that triggers you, you can still long to be close to them. That can still be a feeling in you. And it probably will be strongly because you're triggered. And the anxious attachment is a subconscious programming. So it's these kinds of programmings that get set off and get very strong in times of being triggered. So you might actually be like, even more so like no please because you're triggered, but you're probably at a place where deep down there's some core beliefs like or some thoughts coming up that feel like if you don't get close to me, you are the cause of my pain or you're leaving me to suffer. So this means that like I have this longing to be close. So I might be a little confused of like I don't see them necessarily as the enemy. Like I want them like here and I want to work it out. But it's like a contingent too. And it's very conditional because it's like if they don't do that, then they're the source of my pain. Like by them getting distant, by them withdrawing, by them not wanting to talk about it, they are the source of my pain. And that, right, is saying that they are the cause. That is saying they're the problem. That is making them the enemy. They're the ones hurting you. They're the ones causing harm to you. So like let's say they take space and it's like, you're leaving me to suffer. And then like while they're gone in this example, you might be so upset because you long to be close to them, but it's like, why are they doing this to me? Why are they doing this to me? So you can still see how with the trigger, you will still see them as like the enemy in that way. Like there's someone who they are someone who is like actively harming you in whatever way, um, even though there's that longing for the closeness. Okay, so back to just regular track, but I just wanted to make that clear because I felt like that could kind of seem like a confusing or conflicting concept. So for those that that applies to, I want to make sure that they have this kind of understanding within themselves as well. So it's an against mentality. So regardless of how that shows up, right? So even you being like, you know, please don't go. And they're like, I just don't want to talk about this right now. And they leave. And it's like, why are they doing this to me? They're hurting me. It's like they're against me, right? And then obviously that can show up in a bunch of different ways. But regardless, it's typically this core belief that they are against you. And again, that's just going to be the filter for whatever is going on. So even in that circumstance of the someone leaving, objectively, it could be something like that person is like, I'm taking space, and they might be doing so in a way that is actually overall constructive for the relationship, right? And I'm just saying hypothetical here. They could objectively be doing so in a way that's actually constructive. They might be taking space because they feel deep down they're like this isn't helpful for me to be here, like we're just coming from this place that's like not like we need a breather, like I want to talk when we're in a better place, and that might be where they're coming from, right? We don't know, but what we do know is in this moment like your brain is not going to see it that way, right? Your brain is going to see that action as against you no matter what. So again, there could be some validity, maybe that person is like running away from the situation and it's not from the intention of like we need to do this because this is just like the best decision and like it'll be more constructive to talk after we've had a breather, and I know that I'll be in a better place after I've had a breather, so like I'm going to remove myself. It might not be from that intention, it might be from something else, right? There's all this different level of validity there, but it's important to understand that regardless, you'll just be biased. Like you won't know, you won't allow for the other types of possibilities to be there, not allow yourself to see them if they are there, right? If you're coming from a more secure, sturdy, and like intuitive place, then you'd be able to notice when those things are there, which would be great. Like you'd be able to notice that this person in this example is taking that space because they need to. They're looking out for themselves and they believe it's like most constructive for the relationship. And like, even if, that doesn't feel super great, with your kind of like triggers and wounding, you can be like, I appreciate that. And like, I agree. Right. Or I at least appreciate the fact that that's where you're coming from. And I can respect that and I can honor that. But when you're coming from this triggered place, your brain will not allow you to see that anyway. It'll only allow to see the against. And then what happens is that over time, this leads to the more dominant way of seeing the person. So that's where it will start to become like a problem over time with the triggers is that, we're talking about this moment that this is happening and the moments that it happens and kind of what that looks like for each person on a deeper level, what's really going on with them. But then if these things continue to happen and, they will unless being worked on, if these things continue to happen, then it becomes a more dominant way of seeing the person. So, like I said, we are seeing them as against, and we are disconnected from them. So, over time, unless there's that intervention to work on these things and to work through these triggers, then you're just going to end up having this overall mentality. It may not even be like fully conscious of it, but it's like this feeling in your body and in your mind. And you may feel this now or like in a past relationship where it just doesn't feel like you're on the same team. And it's very easy to assume that what they're doing isn't on your side and isn't in your best interest. And like that's always just kind of the go-to assumption without realizing it. And it just becomes kind of like this state that you're in where instead of automatically assuming that everything that this person does has to do with what they believe to be your best interests and in the interest of the relationship and from a place where they care about you, etc. There's an automation where it's like everything this person is doing isn't isn't for me, isn't supportive to me, isn't in support with our relationship getting better, is selfish, right? And it can turn into like specific narratives, but just in general, it becomes that more dominant way of seeing things subconsciously or perceiving them without realizing it. And it also becomes a dominant way of how you assume that the person is seeing you as well, right? So and this could be because they're actually seeing you that way, like over time, it's becoming their dominant way of looking at you as well, and you're picking up on that, and or you seeing them seeing you that way. But either way, over time, you know, seeing someone as seeing you as, not on their team or like not having the best intentions, like you might have good intentions. It's like no matter what you do, you feel like they just think that you're not on their side. And it's like, no, I was doing this because like I was trying to be helpful. And it can be very frustrating, right? And it's like, oh, you're not seeing all the ways that like I'm here or that I'm trying to work on things, like you're not seeing it, right? So you can also be affected by the way you see them seeing you or think that they're seeing you either way. And then that shapes how you interact. Both of those things shape how you interact with them and with them with you and with each other, because it becomes the dominant ways and then now you're going to interact from that place without realizing that. And it's just going to cause more and more disconnect. And again, disconnect can look a lot of different ways. It can look like settling and unfulfillment. It could look like sweeping things under the rug and avoidance. It could come up or can show up in ways where you are like arguing a lot. It can show up in ways that are more explosive. And at the underlying issue of it is like this disconnection can lead to like problems like with intimacy. So either it's like the only times you feel connected is like during intimacy, which can lead to like a lot of like roller coaster of emotions and of a relationship, or more like the opposite, where it can lead to a lack of intimacy because when you subconsciously see the person in that way, it's like you might not want to like be intimate with them, right? Like, you might not want to be intimate with someone who you feel like is like against you, right? So yeah, it can lead to a whole slew of problems.
Sorry to interrupt Sunny Days podcast, folks. Just wanted to pop in as a little bridge here. We are skipping over a section of this lesson just because it so builds on all of these things that we would have already learned if we were in the Love and Happiness program. So having this middle section would be more confusing than anything. So I had taken that out and we will segue further on into this video lesson.
So people are unreasonable when they're triggered. Literally. They're literally unreasonable. I mean this without a connotation, without judgment. They're literally unreasonable. You, me, and others are in a place in our brains and in our nervous system that is literally without reason. Like I said, we're not in this prefrontal cortex that has the reasoning. So people are literally unreasonable when they're triggered. And like, this is just an important thing to keep in mind. Like I said, neutrally, this is without judgment or anything, but like we need to start understanding these things better, both for ourselves, that if we're triggered, we're not coming from a reasonable place, and this isn't to judge us and be like, you're throwing this out of proportion and you're so unreasonable. That's not for us to say towards ourselves or to someone else. But what I'm saying is that it's important to literally understand that we are acting and thinking and feeling unreasonably. There doesn't need to be judgment there, but we need to know that so that it's like, wait, so then I'm not going to like follow this down, right? And I'm not going to be like roped into this ruse in this story, whether that's my own or someone else. And I mean that in an objective way, and like a secure and sturdy way, that this is unreasonable. So when we're triggered, we're no longer taking in the objectivity of the situation. So we know that, you aren't seeing the situation as objective when you're triggered. And we've been talking about that, but it's important to understand that you are no longer taking it that way to any new information, right? And to any new insight. And neither is the other person. If that person is triggered, no one's taking in the objectivity of the situation. So this is kind of like what I was saying, that someone might actually do something where the intention is like, I actually want to help and like work this out. The other person, once they're triggered, they're not taking any objectivity of the situation in. So it doesn't matter like what amazing language you use. It doesn't like I statements and things like that. They're no longer taking new information in a way that is objective. They're only taking in new information in a way that is like, this person is against me. This person hurt me. This person is why I'm angry, right? On either side. So it's important to know with any new information that that is not going to be received as objective. So don't beat yourself up if you have tried that and like it like wasn't getting through to them. It makes sense that it wasn't getting through to them. And it's probably the same for you. We just don't realize it, right? So not open to new insight and information. And not open to truly working with the other person. Remember, there's that again. So none of that is going on right now. So what happens a lot with triggers is that people will try to communicate, and be like, we need to communicate about this, or I'm going to try to communicate, my feelings right now, about how this person is, talking to me and like feeling about me, and I'm gonna try to like communicate. Okay, well, that person is not taking in the objectivity of anything, and they're not open to new information. They're not open to a plot twist. It's like, oh, plot twist, I was on your team all along, or like plot twist, I actually didn't mean to hurt you, or plot twist, like I'm actually here to help. They're not open to any of that new kind of information, and they're not really open, like physiologically, to working with you, and vice versa. You need to understand that you're coming from a place where you may think that like that's what you really want, but you're not coming from that place. And you're going to just continue to keep intaking things in a way that you're not actually getting the new information that's available. You're not actually getting any plot twists, plot twists in quotes, that's available. You're not actually, you know, truly open to working with the person. And it's just important to know that you're in a different state. So again, it's important to see this for yourself and other people because, right, we're not wanting to go into the story, whether that's our own story of the trigger, whether that's their story of the trigger. We're not wanting to get roped into any of that world. Okay, so first we start working with triggers so that we can get back to reason. But like I mentioned, over time that like this will be a process. So it might be down in the slope where you end up being able to like work through the triggers, not maybe so much in real time, maybe more even like on your own and not in the moment with that person, and be able to work through things and then be able to from there like climb back up into reason. Let's have some like communication and repair. And then over time, that intervention of working through the triggers is going to be sooner and sooner and sooner, less and less down the slope to the point where they're not even really popping up anymore. And like when they do pop up, it turns around quickly and it's like not a big deal. Okay, so now we're gonna go into the big perspective change of the day. I like I put that, the big perspective change of the day. The perspective change of this lesson, the like practice that we're doing that you'll be applying to your love life. So we're gonna focus on this for someone else is the one that's triggered and you are the one that's triggered. You'll have both of these kind of practices under the same umbrella of what this perspective is.
Hello, Sunny Days podcast folks. I am back. Like I had just mentioned towards the end of this podcast episode, but not the end of the video lesson, that I do go further into the actual practices that we are doing in love and happiness. I wasn't able to put that in here because they do go with audio guides and mini workbooks and all these materials that we just don't have access to in this podcast. So I didn't want to just bring up all these resources that you aren't getting directly here in this episode. But with that said, my love and happiness program is currently open. It is incredible. This is just one video lesson of many. This is just one video lesson of one section of many. Love and happiness is a highly guided program that holds your hand through everything you need to create the love life you really came here for, that your soul wants you to have, that you, at the end of the day, will always crave and always want. And when you get it, you will feel so fulfilled and so right. So if in your love life you feel anything less than completely fulfilled, like this is completely right in every way, then this is totally the program for you. And it is for you regardless of where you're at in your love life right now. So you can be single, you can be dating, you can be in a relationship, you can be in a serious relationship, you can be married, you could be anything under the sun as far as where you're at in your love life. And this program applies to you so long as you are wanting to be in it and wanting to do this work with me. I highly recommend that if you have gotten anything from this episode, that you definitely check it out because, like I said, this program is times a million. And as a Sunny Days podcast listener, you get a special discount code as well. So I'll be putting that along with the link to just learn more about the program in the show notes. And I'd love to see you on the inside of it. Thank you for being here today. And as always, have a very sunny day. Bye.